Brett watched his backpack swing like a pendulum from the top bar of the light post. He listened as the small group of his classmates walked away from him, their shoulders squared in defiance, a couple of them patting one another on their backs. The bulb of the post was dark at this early hour, though the neon signs of the dive bar it stood before were lit up bright to let everyone know they were open. Brett could feel the eyes of the older, sad patrons inside watching him, and wondered why none of them had offered to help. Brett stood on his tiptoes, but did not come close to reaching the backpack's dangling strap. He gathered a stick from the ground to knock the bag loose, but broke it in one swing as it made contact. He jumped, and he jumped again. No luck. With a deep sigh, Brett squared himself up to the post and braced his body to climb. He took his arms and hugged the pole, tight to his chest, and slowly began to hoist himself up, bit by bit. Kicking with his legs and gripping oh so hard with his arms, Brett made it to the top after a harrowing 90 seconds of struggle. A feeling of elation swept him as he realized he was eye level with his swaying pack. The excitement slithered away as the sweat that beaded from his body began to slick his palms. He knew he had one shot. With the strap just inches away, Brett flung his hand and knocked the bag free. The pack fell to the cement with a thud, a mere second before Brett fully lost his grip. Clamoring to stay connected to the pole, Brett slid down hard and landed with a forceful splat on his rear. As Brett winced, he heard what sounded like the crackling of electricity. Raising his gaze, his eyes locked to the bulb of the lamp, pulsing with new light. Its glow was bright at first, but as the pops of current zapped around him, the bulb flickered to an orange, then a pink, then a red, before landing on a vibrant magenta color. A rainbow of colored fog spilled from the base as Brett scooched himself back. What was happening? Did he break the light? Would he have to pay for it? With one final vibrant explosion, out of the fog popped a figure. Brett's heart hammered in his chest as the fanfare diminished into nothing. If not for the drunk-looking man with the bright purple skin that had not been there a moment before, Brett would have thought his fall had knocked a few screws loose. "Howdy hey, howdy ho, give me a wish and let's go," the man slurred. He rattled a cocktail glass in his hand and looked around the empty sidewalk, not noticing the quivering 15-year-old. The strange man took a step forward, kicking Brett's backpack as he did. The misstep caused the being to trip, tumbling him to the hard ground and spilling the remaining amber liquid and ice. The offension on his face was shocking. "Good God! You can't just leave things like this. Disgusting kids." That's mine," Brett piped up in a voice much higher than he anticipated. The man finally turned to him. There was a moment where they locked eyes, before the man looked up and down the sidewalk again and gave the most exaggerated sigh he could muster. "In my contract, I told them I don't do kids," he whined, picking himself up from his knees. Brett followed suit as the man tried, and drunkenly failed, to pick up the backpack from the cement. Brett scooped his bag quickly and let it dangle from his fist, and studied the being, now putting dirty ice back into his cup. The man seemed to glisten. His skin was saturated in a shimmering glitter that swirled both through him and around him, making him look like a nearly solid state of gas. His eyes were glassy and unfocused. Even standing a few feet away, Brett could smell the saturated stench of alcohol wafting from him. "Listen, kid, I'm not the genie you're looking for, okay? I'm like magic Uber for these drunkos," he said, jutting a fistful of dripping ice towards the bar. Brett's eyes popped. "You're a genie?" he breathed. He squeezed his bag tight into his chest and took a timid step forward. The genie wailed an annoying cry and flung his back into the post. "I had a rough night, kid. I don't want to do this. Just take your one wish and we can get this over with, okay?" Brett's face fell. "One? Genies give 3 wishes. That's what all the movies say," he argued. The genie tutted at him and wagged a shining finger. This ain't the Disney Channel, okay? I make the rules. Rules are one wish for everyone under 21. Brett huffed at the magic man who was refilling his now empty glass with the point of a finger. Maybe 2? Brett tried again. The genie shook his head as he stuck a swirly straw into his tumbler. Uno. Make it count. Brett looked at his backpack. The patches he had taken weeks to sew on were dirty from his spill to the ground. The strap that had hung from the lamppost was now torn from the weight of the fall. He thought of his notebooks inside, wondering if they had been crushed by the weight of the fall, or if his water bottle had spilled onto all his hard work. His eyes followed the path his 6 bullies had taken, back towards campus, away from where they'd left him stranded. They'd meander back to the football field where the girls would fawn over them, even though their only skill was headbutting other numbskulls into a concussive state. He didn't need another moment to think. He knew what he wanted to do. I wish for the jerks that threw my backpack on the lamppost to be horrible, ugly monsters. The genie snapped his fingers. A small plume of periwinkle dust popped from his hand and hovered above the 2 of them, growing bigger and bigger until it cast the 2 of them in complete shadow. Brett's heart raced as it nearly consumed the 2 of them, coming close enough to touch the top of his head. He felt his hair stand up on end as the cloud hung, still for a moment, before zooming towards the school at lightning speed. Wish granted, the genie said as he reached his hand towards the backpack. Brett watched as the genie's hand disappeared through the front of the bag, only to pull back holding Brett's sunglasses in his fingers. I'm taking these. Toodles. And with another snap, the genie was gone. Brett arrived at school the next morning with a spring in his step. He let his mind run wild with scenarios of what ugly, disfigured monsters awaited him in science class. The thoughts kept a surge of glee running through him most of the day. He could barely contain his happiness at lunch, knowing there was only one more bell separating him from the grotesque beasts. He filled his tray to the brim with packaged snacks from the cafeteria and literally skipped to the tables. The table he sat at yesterday was occupied by drama nerds today, not quite his style, so Brett wandered until he found an empty table near the back doors and plopped himself down. He opened a pack of Pop-Tarts and scanned the lunchroom. The 6 jocks that were usually in the corner table were nowhere to be found. Hiding, most likely, Brett thought as he chomped on the sweet strawberry pastry. The lunch bell rang, closing out the period. Brett didn't feel the need to simply walk to class today. He tossed his wrappers away and sprinted as fast as he could to be first through the door to his next class. Brett rounded the corner of the science hall and saw his classroom door already propped open. He wanted a good seat for their shameful entrance, so he chose his usual spot, front row in the second aisle, and waited for them to show. Students filtered in one at a time as the clock ticked closer to the final bell. With a minute left, a tingling of anticipation ran up Brett's spine. He figured those jocks had probably stayed home that day on account of their horrible ugliness. He smiled at the thought. Even if he didn't get to see them, their absence would be proof enough that everything had worked in his favor. The bell blared in the hall. Brett's breath caught in his throat. They were gone. They weren't here. It had worked. Everything had... And in they stepped. The 6 of them were wearing matching game day jackets, holding their bags and books just like everyone else, but somehow making it look remarkably cooler than Brett ever could. They were normal. They were completely and utterly normal looking. There were no marks, no blemishes, nothing to indicate that they were even a little bloated today. They filed past Brett, not acknowledging him in the least, and took their regular back row seats. Brett's mind raced during class. Had they looked any different? Any more horrible looking than yesterday? He hadn't noticed anything new. He deflated. They had looked exactly the same. Science ended with another clang of the bell. Brett sat in his seat until the entire class had left, hoping to catch a glimpse of his bullies once more as they exited. He prayed that by some fleeting chance he had missed a snaggletooth, a bulbous boil, or even a tail. But they passed him, ignoring him yet again, and Brett spied nothing of the sort. Brett spent the rest of his day in a daze. Maybe the genie had been nothing more than hallucination. Maybe Brett had hit his head sliding down that pole, and he had made up the whole thing. After all, he was very creative. He couldn't put it past his mind to make up such a fantastical scene after a little head bump. Brett felt around his scalp, but felt nothing. It was the only explanation. If he had met a genie, it's their sole duty to grant the wish of their master. Brett released him. Brett was his master, and yet his wish was not granted. Brett doodled forlornly in his last class of the day, confident in his solution that he must have simply had a stroke of genius. There was no genie, there was no wish, and his bullies remained as handsome as the girls who swooned over them believed them to be. The final bell chimed. Brett closed his notebook with a snap. Weeks went by without a change, and Brett had forced from his mind the encounter with the tipsy genie. He had poured his forces into the little things he loved, sketching, writing, and video games mostly, and was eyeing the girls on campus a little harder every day as the prom steadily approached. It was Saturday night, and Brett was stationed at the school's snack shack for game day. It was an easy 4 hours of work, and he could pocket about $50 at the end of the day for his service. Perfect. He sat on a stool, grabbed people nachos and popcorn, and doodled in his notebook while a bunch of rowdy dudes slammed their bodies into each other chasing a ball. Brett scoffed at the thought. He didn't understand to yearn to be a football player, nor did he ever want to. Thick-headed numbskulls whose only purpose is to physically harm others? What a waste. Aside from the money, the only real selling point was seeing his fellow students. But if he was being really honest, he was in it for the girls. The unpopular and frankly ugly ones didn't tend to come to the games. It was the cute, desirable ones with the silky hair and the tight shirts that came to watch. And when they watched, they usually bought snacks. Brett grinned as he dumped a ladle full of gooey cheese atop a cardboard box of stale tortilla chips. He knew for a fact that Rebecca Collins would be here, and already had her usual order set aside. A bottle of Sprite, a package of strawberry sour straws, and a small container of salt. She said she liked to dip the sour straws into the salt before she took a bite. According to her, it made them sweeter. He remembered the first time Rebecca had approached the snack shack. She was the last in line when chatting with a friend when she placed a $10 bill on the counter. After she had placed her order and gathered her things, she had smiled at him and said, "Thanks, Brett." She had remembered his name from science class. She had known him. He wanted her to know he knew her too. Brett made a point to not watch the game, or any game for that matter. If people came up, sure, he'd catch a glance. But what growth did it bestow upon him to observe such a match when he could be thumbing through an actual piece of literature or working on his comic? It was nonsense, really. The lights in the stadium blared down bright as the sun began to set, casting a white glow onto the field before him. Brett stared at his college-ruled notebook and tapped his mechanical pencil in a rhythm against the wire spirals, trying to think of what else his comic needed. The chill of the night started to settle in as a gust of wind ruffled the pages. Brett set his cardboard container of nacho-drenched chips on the edge of the paper to keep them in place and continued to sketch. The stars in the sky began to twinkle, peeking now through the dissipating clouds. Behind the brightness of the stadium lights, Brett saw the round, full moon beginning to emerge above. All at once, there was a gasp from the crowd. Another player getting injured, no doubt, Brett thought with a wicked chuckle. But then people began to scream, and a thundering of footsteps rattling the bleachers shook the floor beneath Brett's feet. Despite his feigned disinterest, Brett looked up. The snack shack was located on the side of the bleachers, towards the entrance of the field, so patrons could grab their snacks and sodas on their way in. It made for great marketing, but not so great visibility. He could see a small sliver of the field from his post, but no players were visible. The action must have happened towards the center of the gridiron. A stampede of people pushed down the steps and rounded the corner. Their faces were flushed with panic as they pushed past each other, tripping over themselves as they sprinted towards the parking lot. Brett couldn't help himself. He left his post and ran through the crowd, bumping off the bodies escaping the game. They screamed as they scrambled past. "What was that?" "Horrible. Just horrible." Brett's breath caught in his throat as he shoved, getting closer and closer to the field. What was horrible? What had happened? Beasts. Monsters. Run. Just run. Brett reached the fence with a gasp. Amongst the screams and cries, Brett heard a chorus of hooting and hollering. The remaining crowd was made up of mostly his peers, stamping their feet and cheering with a mighty force towards the sight on the field. Brett's mouth felt dry as he watched, in absolute horror, as 6 giant, ripped werewolves barreled through the opposing team and scored the game-winning touchdown. "I told you I wanted them to be horrible, ugly monsters." Brett was hunched under the streetlight, his face beet red as he screamed. His arms were tight against his side with balled fists, looking like a toddler throwing a tantrum, and the genie who stood before him could not be more displeased. The genie rubbed his eyes under the sunglasses he had stolen from Brett 2 weeks prior. He very much wanted this conversation to be over. "They're like super cool werewolves. You just made them more popular," Brett was yelling. The genie knocked the sunglasses down his nose and glared at Brett. "Okay, first off, you said monsters, so I went with that," the genie corrected. "Second, werewolves are terrible. I know this werewolf, Frank, stole $50 from me. Awful beasts. I did you a favor. No one's gonna want to play poker with those douchebags." "I don't care if no one wants to play poker with them. I want people to hate them." Brett's mind spiraled down the past week's events. There were posters along the school's hallways depicting his bullies, snapshots of them in mid-transformation at the game, pictures of them huddled together at the end zone with the football in their jowls, a particularly popular image of a werewolf, center field, with the tatters of his uniform hanging from his fur. The kids at school flocked around the werewolf jocks every moment and squealed. They wore t-shirts made from markers and paints they'd thrown together that weekend. They had wolf ears they wore to class now, even sold from makeshift shops at their lockers. And even worse, the morning announcements now ended with a howl, which everyone joined in upon. "Give it time, kid. Werewolves are like the Instagram models of the cryptid world, okay?" The genie slurred. "Eventually, everyone's gonna get sick of hearing about how handsome they are." "You're not helping," Brett cried. He sat on the ground in a huff and buried his face in the crook of his elbow. The genie watched Brett's outburst. He nudged the kid once with his foot, but Brett did not move. He tried again. No dice. The genie's sigh turned into a full-blown grumble as he waited for Brett to stand, but Brett was nowhere near close to complying. Finally, the genie threw his hands into the air in defeat. "Okay, kid. All right. I need you to make a wish so I can go back inside, please." Brett peeked up with glistening eyes and sniffled. "I thought I only got one wish," he said. The genie rolled his eyes and threw Brett's stolen sunglasses back on his magenta face. "You get one at a time, but only 2 total. So don't make this a habit." Seeing Brett scramble to his feet, the genie waved his excitement down with a couple of snaps. Come on, what do you want? Make it quick." Brett laced his fingers together and thought hard on what he wanted, what he truly needed. Seeing the jocks praised so openly in the hallways, the t-shirts, the headbands, the absolute adoration. He wasn't going to kid himself. He wanted all of that too. He wanted the pats on the back, the support, the attention. Brett took a deep breath and turned to the genie. "I wish I was a werewolf." With a heavy eye roll, the genie snapped his fingers. The periwinkle puff of dust sprouted from his fingers once more. It hovered in the air and shimmied its way above Brett's head, growing bigger with each passing second. Brett held his breath as the cloud froze for a moment before engulfing him completely in a cluster of cotton candy-colored smoke. As quickly as it appeared, it was gone. Brett looked to his side, but the genie had vanished along with it. A week went by with Brett anxiously anticipating that month's full moon. He had prepared himself as much as he could, reading as much fiction and mythology about lycanthropes as he could get his hands on, buying a new set of jeans in case he completely tore out of his current ones, and, most importantly, picking his favorite girl to ask to prom. He had it all figured out. The jocks were throwing a transformation party on the next full moon. They had invited all of their friends and biggest fans to watch them change into the perfect beasts they were. Brett knew the only way to really get the girl he wanted was to be at that party, and to show them all that he was just as cool as the rest of them. Brett's ego swelled. He knew they'd love him just the same when they saw how he was just like them. Maybe they'd even invite him out once in a while. He could join their study group again for science. They could all split a limo and the big dance or something. Whatever, he hadn't thought that hard about it. The lunch bell chimed before Brett even realized what time it was. He scooped away his trash and made a dash for his science class down the hall, arriving first as usual. It was daunting today for some reason. Brett stood by his usual seat and wondered if he could change it up today. Why not? On Sunday, his whole world would change. Wouldn't taking a little step today prepare him for that moment? Brett nodded to himself and moved his backpack 2 rows back. He sat smack in the middle of the aisle, very much aware that the jocks would be closer to him now and, even more importantly, Rebecca Collins would be among the surrounding crowd. A warmth filled his chest, and Brett decided to try to distract himself with his doodles. Pulling his notebook from his bag, Brett flipped past the first few pages of notes to find last week's sketches. There were a couple of trees with dangling swings hanging from the bottom branches. A warrior with a samurai sword standing on top of the rock face. An entire page of a girl, bustier than her frame can hold, posed in different positions holding various weapons. Students began to enter the class as Brett scanned through his pages. He quickly turned back to the less racy drawings to avoid any uncomfortable conversations as his peers began to file past him. Trevor Nerio, one of the quieter theater nerds, took the empty seat to Brett's left. With a glance, Brett scanned his outfit and felt a bubbling of laughter in his chest. Trevor was wearing a button-down silk shirt in a baby pink color, with a khaki bow tie around his neck to match his trousers. Brett felt embarrassed for him. Why so dressed up for something as simple as school? That's pretty neat. Brett turned to see Trevor leaned a couple inches towards his desk. He followed Trevor's eyes and saw that he was looking at Brett's drawing, a sketchy-looking snake wrapped around an apple. I like it. Could be a tattoo or something. I didn't know you liked to draw, Trevor continued. He smiled at Brett. The jocks started to file through the door. They were chatting as they entered, chuckling to themselves about something. A couple of classmates hooted and howled at them as they crossed the threshold, but they didn't even seem to notice. Brett was shocked. How could they not notice it? The adoration. The 6 of them entered the aisle to make their way to the back row of seats. Brett could feel the panic building in his chest. He had to say something. They couldn't see him talking to Trevor and welcome Brett into their pack. He had to act. Yeah, well, I take art classes on the side, pretty good ones, so I don't know, I don't have to try so hard to be taken seriously, he babbled to Trevor. The jocks started to pass. Not like you and that stupid bow tie. The hurt flashed across Trevor's face as the jocks walked between them. Brett wondered if they'd heard his quip. His eyes darted to them, wondering if they'd laugh at his joke, wondered if they'd slyly drop a palm down for a high five. But they passed him without a word and took their seats. Trevor was gathering his things as the jocks seated themselves. He moved himself to the only other empty seat in the class, and suddenly taking his place was Rebecca Collins. Worth it, Brett thought. Brett doodled through class, his mind wandering through the upcoming transformation party. He wondered if they'd be excited to have another werewolf join their pack. He wondered if the transformation hurt. He wondered if Rebecca would be there. Sighing, he hashed in thick shadows for the final panel in his comic. The scene depicted the muscular hero and his female sidekick as they finished their final fight against the gang of giant spiders they had been battling for the past 3 pages. The two were clutched in each other's enamored embrace, their clothes torn in miraculously revealing ways. He took extra time on this page, a little voice in his head hoping that Rebecca would see him concentrating on the page and take a peek at his work. He ran through every scenario where she saw his comic and gasped in excitement. She would swoon and tell him how great and talented he was, how gorgeous the main character was, and maybe even feel a little flattered at how much she resembled the heroine. Brett cleared his throat as he turned the page. He felt her eyes on him as he lifted the paper, letting it hover a second longer so she could potentially see her likeness in the lines. The bell rang, and the chorus of students packing up filled the room. Brett waited for the jocks to file out before him, watching them shoulder their bags and walk towards the door. So cool. How did they do it? He tried to catch Rebecca's eyes as she shoved her notebook into her shoulder bag, but she seemed distracted. He watched her scoop up her remaining books and shuffle quickly away from her desk. She picked up the pace and waved to the jocks as they were about to leave, clutching her books to her chest. Brett watched as they halted, waiting for her to join their little cluster of cool. Rebecca's lips moved quickly, her words inaudible to Brett. He stood up to round his own things just as she turned and stared at him. Brett's heart hammered in his chest. Their eyes locked for a few seconds longer, her beautiful lips still moving as she spoke. She was looking at him. On purpose. She suddenly broke her eyes away to turn her attention back to the jocks. The tallest jock nodded once with a small smile, obviously trying to maintain her interest. No way. Not after she saw what Brett had made of her. She had seen the picture. He knew it. She knew Brett had drawn her, and she was enamored now. It was the only explanation. Just wait, Brett thought. Just wait until Sunday, then she'll really see what I can be. Rebecca walked ahead of the 6 jocks, leaving the class altogether. He spent the rest of his classes thinking of her and wondering if Sunday was the best day to plan his surprise. Social media was abuzz with the party details. Some people were claiming it was at a mansion in the hills. Others were saying it was in the middle of the woods, and the only food there would be raw meat that everyone would have to catch themselves. It turned out to be at a little suburban house in the middle of town. A simple 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom place with a decent-sized backyard. The party was strictly invitation only. At least that's what all the posts were saying. Brett was lucky enough to find an accidental tag location on a particularly loudmouth student's live feed. That was all Brett needed. Brett arrived at the party on his bike. He passed the house twice, trying to muster up the courage to park it and make his way in. There was an anxiousness inside him today, and he wondered if it was the werewolf building beneath his skin, or typical teenage timidness. It took a solid 10 minutes before Brett psyched himself enough to hop off his bike and make his way down the entry path. Brett gripped the straps of his backpack as he crossed the threshold of the house. There were students piled in every corner, many that he recognized from classes, and quite a few he didn't know existed. Brett felt a smug smile snaking over his lips. He may not know them, but they sure as hell were gonna know him tonight. The kitchen island was piled with snacks. Big bowls of chips, fresh salsa, pigs in a blanket, still warm, surrounded by coolers of sodas and juices. Brett's forehead puckered. Sodas and juice? Where was the beer? The hard alcohol? What kind of party was this? This wasn't what he had seen in the movies. He spotted a particularly thick congregation of his peers gripping red party cups standing towards the back door. Maybe the alcohol is outside, he thought. Brett pushed through the dense crowd of teens by the sliding glass door and stumbled onto the patio. The backyard was a small wooden landing that stepped down into an open plush yard of grass with a mismatching of lawn chairs strewn about. There were more coolers out here, but upon inspection, Brett only spotted cans of root beer and off-brand lemon lime soda. Maybe the jocks weren't as cool as he thought. Brett took another glance around the yard, wondering where any of the Special Six football players were tonight. It was starting to get darker, which meant their time to shine was soon to be upon them all. The cooler of ice numbed his fingers the instant he dunked his hand in. He pulled out a lemon lime can and rubbed the condensation off with his thumb, first making a small star, then a heart, and then wiping the whole thing clean. They hadn't splurged on anything name brand for the party. It was a good thing he had come prepared. The air slowly grew colder as he stood outside, gripping his can of soda between his already chilled fingers. He could have gone inside, but Brett knew that eventually the party would move to the backyard so everyone can watch the transformation. It was best to stay here, in plain view, because eventually Rebecca would show, and Brett could surprise her the way he always wanted. Another 10 minutes crept by. 2 or 3 people had joined him on the patio, but didn't make any small talk. They simply grabbed a beverage and meandered back towards the house. At every slide of the glass door, Brett turned to see who was coming. He was disappointed every time, until finally, Rebecca stepped through the door. It was his chance. Finally, his chance. Brett fumbled with his soda for a moment before placing it unceremoniously on the ground. He walked with unfound confidence toward her as she laughed with one of her much less beautiful friends. The looks on their faces as he approached wasn't something he expected to see. He wouldn't have called it disgust, but the way Rebecca's eyes widened, the way her shoulders turned, it was as if she was a mouse being cornered. "What are you doing here?" were the first words out of Rebecca's mouth. Brett wasn't terribly shocked. He hadn't been invited, and he knew she didn't expect him to show, but alas, here he was. "Surprise!" he said, wiggling his fingers in a flourish. He laughed lightly, wondering why they weren't excited. "Brett, you have to leave," she said. His name faking from those lips made him feel like he was floating. I know. I technically don't belong here, but I will soon, I promise," he said smugly. His vague response did not promote the air of curiosity he was hoping. Time to pull out the big guns. "I'm actually really happy I ran into you. There's something I wanted to show you," Brett continued. Rebecca reached to her friend's hand as Brett swung his backpack over his shoulder and began to dig around inside. He looked up at the two of them and saw them wide-eyed and panicked as he raised his hand. Clutched in his fists were 2 packages of sour straws and a cylindrical container of salt. Rebecca and her friend heaved heavy sighs and clutched at their chests. "Jesus, Brett. Oh my God, Jesus," Rebecca panted. I thought... But she never finished her sentence. She just shook her head. "Brett, you need to leave." "Wait, let me finish. I wanted to give these..." "No?" "To you because I know they're your favorite, and I thought..." "No!" "Maybe you and I could..." "Jesus, no!" "Go to prom together?" Rebecca lost it. She screamed a horrible, ugly sound and slammed her palm down on Brett's gifts, knocking them to the ground. "No, no, absolutely not. You cannot pretend that you didn't do anything wrong here," she shrieked. Brett was puzzled by her reaction. Maybe she's on her period, he thought. "You creep on me all the time. You drew that freaky-ass comic of me, you broke into my locker, you stole my journal and my clothes. The only reason I even feel remotely safe in the same room as you is because of Eli and his friends." Brett blinked at her. The day he had watched his backpack swing from the lamppost was the day the jocks had found him reading the journal. He had skimmed through it originally, trying to find something to give him a leg up, only to have them completely ruin his plan. He hadn't meant to upset her. He hadn't meant to bother her. He just wanted to know every part of her, inside and out, and knew the way he was then wasn't going to be enough. Tonight, though, tonight he would show her. He would show all of them. The screaming on the patio had caused quite a scene. Suddenly, the jocks he'd been searching for were making their way towards Brett. "You all right?" the tallest one asked. "I'm fine," Brett responded. Rebecca scowled at him. No one acknowledged him for a moment as the 6 meatheads ushered Rebecca away. Brett tried to follow at first, until the 2 in the back turned to him and began to move him towards the grass. In an instant, all 7 of them were away from the growing crowd on the patio, standing alone in the center of the yard. "Brett," the tallest one said. It was only one word, only his name, but there was a weight to it. "Hey," Brett responded, trying to keep his voice a calm, even tone. "Brett, what are you doing here? This is a private party. I really don't think we invited you," the shortest, stockiest one muttered. A couple of them put their heads in their hands. "Well, first of all, I wanted to say this is a very lovely home," Brett started, gesturing to the backyard. "Thank you, it's my parents' house. They're upstairs, so please don't try anything else," the tallest one said, his voice coming out in more of a snap. The curly-haired one placed a hand on his shoulder. "I don't know what you mean by try something else. You don't know what I mean?" The tallest had taken another step towards him, towering near a foot taller than Brett. The other 5 jumped forward, almost as if they couldn't help it. Brett's eyes widened as he felt himself taking a step back from the sheer power of them all. "Wait, let me finish. Not only have you made Rebecca very uncomfortable, you've made the rest of our guests upset. Your sheer presence is making people uneasy." "Well," Brett muttered, fiddling with the drawstrings of his hoodie, "I don't know why anyone should be upset I'm here. I don't want to be a nuisance, nor do I think I'm ever..." They cut him off. "You made fun of Trevor for absolutely no reason last week," the long-haired one said, crouching forward. "You called me a pea-brained dumbskull for getting an 80% on our science project," the stocky one spat. "You called my house 7 times to tell me you wished I were dead after I got the part of the fall show over you," the dark-haired one growled. "Do you even know our names?" The blonde one snarled. Why are you here? Brett swallowed, his mouth suddenly salivating in a way he had never once experienced before. Drool was starting to pool in the corners of his mouth, and his skin was becoming damp with a hot sweat. The 6 in front of him were starting to look uncomfortable. The shortest one sat back on his heels and began to remove his jacket. Brett's eyes became unfocused. It was getting darker. He could suddenly hear the footsteps of the students inside beginning to rush to the yard, realizing the time would soon be upon him. The palms of his hands began to itch, and his sweaty body was starting to overwhelm him with heat. The tallest one gripped his head and knelt to the ground, a low rumble rattling his chest. He swore and ripped off his jacket. You better leave, Brett, he snarled. We've only done this once, and we probably got pretty lucky we didn't run into you the first time, the cropped-haired one chimed. You don't understand, Brett managed to gasp. I did this. I made you like this. The 6 of them craned their necks through the sudden sucker punch of pain to look at him. Brett fell to his knees as the darkness crashed over the 7 of them, rocking each and every one of them to the grass. You! But I'm one of you now, Brett tried. He raised his trembling hands and watched in absolute horror as his fingers began to crack back into the gnarled shape of paws. But the 6 had descended on him. Suddenly Brett was on his back, surrounded by the 6 jocks, all of them foaming at the mouth, their eyes turning a bright and wild yellow. Scum! The blonde one roared. There was a cheering in the back. We didn't ask for this, the short one snarled, grabbing Brett's chest with a bulging muscular hand. We didn't want this, the long-haired one growled as his shoulders began to crack and round. How can you live with yourself? Why would you do this? You bullied me. You threw my bag up and... You've been stalking Rebecca for 2 months now, the tallest one yelled. We took your bag to get you away from her, to get her shit away from you. Do you know how uncomfortable you made her? How scared she was? He slammed his hands on either side of Brett's head. A sickening snap echoed through Brett's skull as he felt his jaw crack into a new position. He screamed as his spine elongated and his ankles popped. Brett watched in pure agony as the tallest boy changed before his eyes. His mouth dropped blood as razor-sharp fangs broke through his gums. His own jaw snapped and shifted as it elongated into the muzzle of a beast. I'm one of you, Brett screamed, his own blood spilling from his mouth. The pack, a monstrous gang of half-transformed beasts, glared at him and began to pace on all fours to the cheering of the gathered crowd. The tallest one stood on his hind legs, his back bursting through the shirt on his back. The tatters fell to the ground like confetti and the audience whooped in response. He reached down and grabbed Brett by his puny, sparse scruff and drew him up to his bright yellow eyes. With his final human breath, he forced the guttural, snarled words that broke Brett to his core.
You will never be one of us.
Brett awoke, aching from head to toe on a patch of matted, chalk-covered grass. The sun was just beginning to rise in the sky, causing an explosion of oranges and pinks to scatter amongst the clouds behind the large stadium lights. It took him a moment to realize why he was outside, and why he was completely naked. His dirty backpack sat next to him, a little less full after the candy had been destroyed at the party, but a soft spot remained at the bottom. As he raised a heavy hand to the bag, the faded memories of the night began to flicker through his mind. They had changed into the 6 beautiful beasts that had adorned the walls of the school. And Brett had changed too. His wolf form had been meek and small, a cowering nothing amongst their strong central pack. What the tall one had warned had come true. He was not one of them. Brett was an intruder to them, and their instincts kicked in the moment the full moon had graced them all. Brett tasted blood as he unzipped his backpack. His eye felt swollen and tender, and his scan with his tongue told him he was missing a few teeth. He wondered if he had been able to hold his own during the fight, but his forearm covered in bruises gave him all the answers he needed. Brett pulled from his backpack a pair of women's gym shorts and an old stained t-shirt. In permanent marker on the tag, Collins was written. It was all he had, and he couldn't run around naked. Someone would call the cops. Brett stood up to yank the shorts onto his aching body, only to feel something fall from his chest. Surprised, he bent down to pick up a torn piece of paper from a yellow legal pad and read this scrawl upon the lines. Never speak to us again. Paul, Rodney, Gus, Trenton, Eli, and John. Brett wandered the path from the football stadium, limping as he went. He dragged himself to the lamppost before the still-open dive bar and rubbed the cool metal with his palm. They all thought I was a dick. They basically told me to my face that I was a dick. They asked how I could even live with myself. Brett moaned. He tenderly touched his swollen lip. Weren't werewolves supposed to be super healing, or was he thinking of Wolverine from the X-Men? Yeah, total shame. Can I help you with something, or are you gonna just sit here and grumble about how much you suck? The genie huffed. Brett looked up at the genie. His glassy eyes were staring back, angry. Do you think I'm a dick? Brett whispered. Well, kid, you're talking to a drunk genie you found in a lamppost instead of, I don't know, any human being on the planet, which makes me think you probably aren't inundated with a ton of friends. Am I right? Brett watched as the genie took a long pull from his fruity beverage, clearing the whole glass in one fell swoop. He dropped his head to his knees. They were right. I'm not one of them. I don't know why I even tried. How can I even live with myself? Brett breathed. He closed his eyes and pressed his face hard into his thighs until colors popped behind his lids. Do you wish you could live with yourself? If he hadn't felt the breath against his ear, Brett would have thought the words had been merely a thought in his head. Brett lifted his head to see the genie's face nearly touching his own. Brett didn't flinch, only nodded once. I do, he said. With a devious grin, the genie snapped his fingers. The once periwinkle cloud that burst from the snap was now a dark, blackish red. It bubbled like lava and oozed over itself, spilling to the cement in thick heaps, sticking like molasses to Brett's shoes as it slowly began to climb his legs. Brett's panic spiked. The goo was traveling faster now, engulfing his chest, encasing his arms, gripping its way up his neck. As Brett began to scream, the thick membrane covered his mouth before furiously jamming itself down Brett's throat. His eyes were coated in the substance, quickly followed by the muffling of the slime entering his ear canal. He couldn't see, he couldn't hear, he couldn't breathe. Brett struggled under the thickening weight of the goo before, and as suddenly as it had encased him, it was gone. Brett's vision swirled. Drool spilled from his mouth and coated the sidewalk as he gagged and sputtered from the assault. Everything he saw was doubled, and the spinning of his equilibrium caused him to heave. With a trembling hand, he reached up to wipe the sweat from his brow as it dripped into his blurry eyes. His hand touched his skin, but the feeling was foreign. He could feel the skin. He could touch his nose, his ear, his cheek. But the sensation of his hand touching flesh was not the pressure he was familiar with. He turned his face to look at his hand, and as he did, he was suddenly face to face with himself. Sprouted from a second neck out of his shoulders, a second Brett stared back at him, blinking and spinning in his new double vision. Brett slapped at the new head. The new head slapped back at him. Both of the mouths fell open, screaming in sync. Blood-curdling, panicked wails echoed down the empty, sunrise-colored street. Falling back, staring at his own face, Brett covered his eyes and sobbed, each hand covering its own pair of eyes. Through the wrecking sobs that burst from him, Brett heard a mirthless chuckle. He peeked through his fingers towards the pavement to see the bright purple feet of the genie, crisscrossed on the pavement before him. The genie leaned down and examined Brett's first tear-stained face, then swung his head to the next one. A wicked smile danced on his lips. "Maybe this will help you live with yourself," he said. Brett's breath caught in his chest. He could see the genie from both angles, sitting, marveling at his work, admiring the monstrosity he had truly become. The genie stood up, dropped his empty glass to the ground with a shatter, and dusted off his hands. "That's 3. And with a snap, he was gone.